Hey guys, I know it's been a rough year for most all people, um, all over the world, especially with COVID happening and restrictions changing people's life, changing people's culture. It's been hard, and not only that, here in our country, we've dealt with what are injustices. We've dealt with accusations against entire groups of people. We've watched innocent people get hurt, and we've watched an entire leadership shift in our government, accusations of fraud, that sort of thing. And we also have an immigration crisis going on right now. Why I call that a crisis is because we already are divided in our country. We're already not taking care of the people who live here or who have came here legally. When I say legally, they just went through a process of coming in. That way they have an understanding of maybe the laws and how this is done or that's done in a basic form. That's all I mean by that. And the left grabs right onto that narrative they've been using for years and years and say, well, you don't want immigrants here because you're a white supremacist. And I apologize for the video. My camera's probably going to shift and move some because it's really windy out, and I just don't feel like making a video inside right now. But I've been trying to put my finger on what bothers me the most about what's happening right now. What does it mean to be a patriot? What does it mean to appreciate your country or love your country? What does it mean to be accepting of other people? What does it mean to be okay with other cultures and the way people do things? Because right now it seems like whoever has the most money or the loudest voice is the ones who get to define that for all of us. And even in ancient philosophy, you had people like Plato and Aristotle who debated on whether rationalism was the way to go when coming to conclusions or empiricism. Basically, that difference between what somebody feels or perceives and what's actually going on outside of them. And at its core, both are relevant. Your perception of things, how it feels, and what's going on. But no matter what, you always have to go back to a reference point of what's actually happening. And this narrative from the left it's based so much on perception and so much on accusation, and so often we don't get to hear any examples of what it is that justifies the claims that are being made. If you watch TV or listen to the radio at all, you'll notice a pattern of what people are trying to create. What the people who have money and the people who have the loudest voice, what kind of culture are they trying to create? And what kind of culture are they trying to silence? If you watch for the themes within commercials, watch for the themes in TV shows and on the radio, you'll see what that's about. And it helps give them that virtuous angle of what they're doing. It puts it into a social justice. Let's bring people up into, give them power and set things straight, that sort of thing. And like I've always said, every time I think I bring this up, that we get penalized as conservatives for wanting to find balance. We get penalized for wanting to reference actual things happening rather than just preference or how it feels. And that age-old argument, which one's more relevant, how I feel or perceive it, or what's actually happening? That's the same argument that's happening today between the left and the right, or even moderates. It's what is happening, and can you give me facts that I can weigh that from, because we certainly can have perceptions that aren't true. We certainly can feel a certain way about a certain thing based on ideas and beliefs without weighing it. And I'm going to bring up some facts right now because it's always pointed toward white supremacy, always. And I'm going to stop being silent on it. And if I offend somebody by what some of the things I'm going to bring up, I apologize. My goal is not to minimize suffering of any group. My goal is to bring up what's actual. So I'm gonna bring up a few facts that need to be considered. Why do they need to be considered? Because it changes concept, it changes narrative, and it also changes how a person feels about certain things. So think about this. There was an Arab Muslim slave trade before there was a European slave trade of Africans. The Arab slave trade actually lasted longer than the European slave trade. We don't hear anything about that ever because Arabs are not considered white. But you don't ever hear it. Africans sold other Africans to Europeans and to Arabs. That's part of history. Slavery in itself is an ugly thing, obviously. But my point is, the only thing that's ever referenced is slavery in America, and by white people. You guys also realize that there were black people in early America who owned other black people as slaves. That's part of the history of America that we never hear. Often we hear about white people coming and taking land from natives. You guys realize native tribes were also taking land from each other, battling each other and just taking over somebody else's land. They done the very thing that white people did. Natives also at different times have stolen slaves and resold them to other people. That's part of the history. Part of our history here in America also is white people are killed by law enforcement. That's just simply part of the statistics. Is it to a higher or lesser degree? Percentage-wise, there's a lot of white people who are also killed by police. So I'm not, and profiled according to how they present themselves. Profiling almost always has to do with how a person looks or how they dress. Now why does that matter? Because certain ways a person dress either affiliates them with criminal type people. And when I say criminal type, if I'm to wear an outfit of a group of people who are dominantly Caucasian, and this could even be suits even. I'm just saying, you could be wearing a suit, but if you present yourself in a certain way, you tend to get profiled. That's just how that is. I mean, certain gangsters, right, wear suits. But you have other ones that wear leather. Then you have other cultures of people who you could have baggy pants, certain colors on, whatever. I'm just saying, profiling is not always about color. Profile also has to do with how a person presents themselves and what other sorts of things link them to questionable behavior patterns. Again, I'm not trying to minimize any suffering or injustice from any people, but we never hear the little factors that matter. How often are police officers shot from pulling somebody over, from somebody not complying with what they're saying to do at the time? I'm not saying people haven't been killed by officers unjustly, but what I am saying is, for the most part, those guys they're familiar with how often another law enforcement officer has been shot or beat down from not protecting themselves. Now they don't even hardly have capacity to protect themselves without being called a supremacist. And you're talking about people who know of other people being shot or beat down just from people putting their hands in their pockets or, something to that nature. Again, there's exceptions. There's always exceptions. There's extremists and a-holes in every race and in every group. what inspired me to do this video today more than anything, and like I said, I've had a rough couple weeks, is Jeff from Tennessee wrote a thing up, and at the end of it he mentioned that we're patriots without a country, in a sense. And you could look at it as in being under attack, and I completely see that now. Think about Greek times, Hellenization. What that was the Greek culture basically taking over all the cultures that they had, or countries that they had conquered, and they forced them basically to follow their culture. If you want to look at it even in later times, the English, they took the land from a lot of Scottish people. They punished them if they used their native language. They weren't allowed to wear certain attire that was part of their culture. And their clan system that they lived under and functioned under. Some Scots were even sent to America as a punishment in early days. They didn't come here willingly, they were sent here. And so were some other prisoners, criminals were sent to America because the English sent them here. I'm just saying, you have people with backgrounds and ancestral backgrounds that you have no idea where their people came from or what they went through before they even came here. Most of us don't even talk about that because we don't have any interest in it. All the left brings up is white supremacy, and there's only one group that suffers. Asians and Irish and Asians were treated similarly. The need not apply signs, that happened with Asians as well as Irish people. So many people came here as indentured servants. The African people suffered, though, more than any when it comes to slave trade and actual hard slave labor that continued for a long time. But here in America, we've been using terms like your people did this or your people did that, 500 years ago type stuff, 300 years ago type stuff, and we talk as if it has something to do with right now. Like, I'm completely responsible for something my people did. But there again, I have Scottish roots, I have Irish roots, and English. So, I mean, if you think about this, lineage-wise, DNA-wise, I'm part of the people who oppressed another part of my people from another country. I'm just saying, so many people here have mixed DNA and mixed heritage, mixed bloodlines, and we're constantly trying to point it toward a color. It's not about color. It's not white culture, black culture, brown culture. Most conservatives and moderates are seeking an American culture that's fair to all the people who live here, and we're trying to take in consideration those empirical facts of how it affects everybody. Obviously some people need some assistance in certain ways, and some communities need way more help than others. I agree with that 100%. We already have tons of things in place to help people do things that they need to do to get themselves ahead. But I don't understand what it is the left's trying to do other than completely destroy the foundations of America, because they call it unjust when at its core it has something to do with being fair. Obviously things weren't done in a fair way, but the principles, this is the empirical part that I'm talking about, because we can show those principles in a clear-cut way. Those principles were meant to protect all people. It wasn't applied like it should have been, obviously, and still in some spots it's not. But I don't know where you end with all this. And I mean, it just seems like wave after wave after wave of chaos happening. We have threat from all different directions about this country and in this country, within it, outside of it. I mean, what do we do? Like what Jeff brought up. What do people who live by principle or seek to live by principle do when the group who lives by personal perception or feeling becomes the ones who dominate and say, you have to follow this culture? There's no give and take here. There's no balance. We need both. The moderate and the conservative tends to be principle based, not feeling based. Liberals tend to be completely feeling based, perception based. Where does that join? I mean, where do we find that middle ground to be able to function together? The left throws whatever they feel like throwing at the time without thinking about consequences. Consequences are that empirical part. This is the reality. This is the actuality. You know, we can't just do one and not the other. And I don't know, I've even been looking for property in other countries. But how far can you run? I had a guy early on in our group said to me, he said, you know, you can only run as far as home. And I thought, you know, wherever my home is, that's as far as I can go. Where do I take a stand? What does America mean anymore at this point? What is it turning into? Because the left has become, and trying to become, what so many other countries have already been. And so many people who did come here in early America, after the Revolutionary War especially, were seeking to leave places like that. America has a lot to offer, opportunity-wise, but we also are not taking care of everybody in an equal and a fair way. You know, the racial injustices, I get the history of it. But I can tell you what, when you want to speak about privilege, and I'm gonna throw this out here too, I'm liable to get a lot of ugly responses from it. But I don't see much of anything that resembles my culture, what I appreciate, out in the public spotlight. Music-wise, commercial-wise, TV show-wise, very little of it. If somebody wants to fire me, they don't have to give hardly any explanation to fire me. If I was a minority, a person would have to give a lot of explanation why they're going to let me go. That's a serious privilege. I used to say this in school. I drive one of the oldest cars in the parking lot, usually where I'm at, or truck, whatever. Women as well as minorities, as well as other Caucasians, drive way nicer cars than me. Where does individual worth and value come into this equation? Or is everything going to be based on a percentage of the group and that's it? It's rough. I mean, it's extremely rough. We can't get, you know, our own group to stay focused on mission. You know, what's the mission of this country? Is it to provide equality? Because if it is, we're not providing equality. We're crapping on one group while we're raising up the other. And here's the argument. Well, the other group is suffering, so they have to have the leg up. I'm going to tell you what, I know plenty of people of all races, all sexes that suffer. So that can't be the end all. That's where this conversation goes and ends. I just want us to start this conversation over what we want. I've asked this question before. What is it that you're fighting for? What do you want the left not to be able to do? Because until we get a handle on what it is our mission is and focus on that and stop fighting over some of the nitpicky stuff, you know, what's the mission? What is it that you want to preserve? What is it that's being done unfair? What is it that's being taught that, you know, the facts are not always put into the equation? Why are the facts not put into the equation? It always ruins the narrative. Can we not have a narrative that explains the whole story? Can we not have a narrative that don't always have to point at the evil white man for being the problem? You know, all races have people who do crappy things. All races have people who are, whether you want to call them racist or prejudiced, I don't care. It means the same thing to me. It's judging somebody based on your preconceived notion of them, or your superiority complex, for that matter. I get sick of that, man. I mean, I know lots of people are sick of it. There's a whole country of people here that do know how to function and live together, but we can't, because there's a bunch of a-holes that continuously bring in this narrative to shoot one group down or the other group down. What's the mission of America? It is, if you wanted to put it in a mission, it is to have freedom. It's to have liberty. It's to have justice. You can't do that by lopsiding the laws, or ignoring the laws, or trying to crush the entire thing so you can start it over in a completely feeling-based or perception-based Marxist or liberal system. I mean, that just can't, again, that can't work. And I don't know, America's quickly becoming something else. And what I mean by something else, I'm not saying, oh, now white people don't control it. I have never had a concern about a color of people controlling anything. My concern is character. My concern is the culture of the people who are running things, because culture does matter. What is your culture teaching is important or valuable? What is your culture teaching that you should, how you should identify people or talk about people? Culture matters. I hope my group, the group of people I belong to that want to watch after this country and want to watch after this culture and work together, I hope we can start spending some time talking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I'm sorry, I'm picking up this phone because it's starting to drizzle out here. As a group, we have to stop focusing in, everybody focusing in on how to structure and who's going to run what. And people start working on things like having conversations like what I'm trying to bring up, topics right now that need to be discussed among people. The topics, bring those up. We have to have these discussions. I mean, our administration right now is bringing in illegal immigrants when it's called illegal. I mean, what is that teaching? You're teaching basically either forcefully pitch a fit, tear stuff up, or do things illegally and you'll get your way. You'll get rewarded for it. That's the culture that we're living in right now. You'll get rewarded for that. That's not going to be a successful culture. Think about the long-term effects of that, as what kind of culture it creates, not what kind of racial group it creates. What kind of culture does it create? It's an unfair, unbalanced, chaotic culture. I'm just having a hard time with it. Surely you can tell. I'm sure lots of other people are. I mean, good gracious, it's been nonstop. It's been nonstop from our government. It's been nonstop even within our group. You know, even family struggles. You know, some of the tension and stresses that are happening right now. I mean, even within families, it's causing, you know, a lot of stress, a lot of discord. We have to focus on mission. What is the virtue? Not what's the narrative that we want to act like what we have. What is the narrative? What's the true thing that's going on? What do we want to protect? And how are we going to go about trying to do that? How can we include all people who are concerned about that? Mainstream has the money, they have the voice, they have the school system. So when I say we've been, in a sense, defeated, what I mean is the people who have the upper hand in power are creating the culture right now. And the culture they're creating in an objective sense, in an empirical sense, is gonna cause a problem. It already is causing a problem. I hate to see that I've had so many people, I know most of us are frustrated with not knowing what to do. Some of us, all we want to go do is firearm train. Some of us, all we want to go do is combat train. Some of us, all we want to do is talk about what we can do and never do anything. What tells me that people want to do something is when they get involved, when they don't have a title, when they try to help other people when they're not getting recognition for it, What I'm trying to do right now is inspire dialogue and inspire action. I can't function without a vision, and I've been struggling to find a vision lately because I haven't known what to do. There's so much things going on. And Jeff helped with that, with something that he wrote up about Patriots Without a Country. And I'll also say my son talked to me yesterday because he was concerned about me, and it was nice for him to do that. He noticed something's really wrong, and we have to talk to each other. I think he helped me understand that yesterday. All of us who really care about the well-being of everyone. You can't just marginalize white people and demonize white people because they're not liberal. I don't try to demonize liberal groups. I will say what don't work about what liberal policies are. But if you want to live in a liberal way within your own community of people, that's on you. But when you start affecting everybody else with it, then that brings me into it. And other people who are moderate or conservative or are worried about actual effects of things. The big Hollywood smiles that lots of liberals have, we're going to provide social justice and racial equality drive that they claim they have, is where all their fire and power is. Ask a person next time, give me an example of not this microaggression stuff. I mean, I'm gonna minimize this. That's why it's called micro. And when it's got something to do with, hey, you're doing microaggressions when you use certain language. Look, we're all going to offend each other in some way. That kind of stuff right there, man, has gone way overboard. Microaggressions, for real. We're adults, right? Microaggressions. You're gonna have different tastes than me. I'm gonna have different tastes than you. I may think my culture is a better way of doing things in this way or that way, and you might think the other. But we're talking about a total group, and I'll reference this to the Watchmen. As a group, we have to do things a certain way to watch out for each other. But in our own community groups, we have the freedom to kind of operate how our own group wants to operate within those communities. Same for the country. I mean, when we affect everyone and what we're doing affects how the next person lives or is viewed, you realize when you put a perception on people, like I'm the stereotypical Southern white male. I mean, look at me, listen to me. You realize, according to where I wind up, whether I'm in a wrong neighborhood, whether I'm in a prison, anywhere like that, whether I'm in a classroom, my point is, I know that I'm being viewed a certain way. Is this just my perception? Do you know why I know it's not just a perception for this? Because the left, the media, the TV, the school system, all is creating a demon personhood for Southern white males, conservatives, moderates. It's there. I know that people have it because the left is pushing it. Now, when you say, I look at you, if I'm a white male here and you're a minority, and you say, I know he's looking at me a certain way. Well, how do you know that? How would you possibly know that? The only people who's saying it is the left. I mean, I know lots of Southerners, and I know very few racist or prejudiced ones. Nobody trying to intimidate or hurt anybody. I'm going to give one last example, and I've given this before as an example of people saying that they know they're going to be attacked or they're fearful for whatever. You guys know this to be true. I mean, it's automatic. It's automatic that a white person is perceived, especially a Southern white male, perceived as racist. And it's all goes back to lots of times the Civil War. Fact being, the highest number of Southerners who actually owned slaves was 25%. That's the highest number. And it's acted like, well, this group of people, their ancestors are people who wanted to enslave and they fought to preserve slavery. This is another one of those facts. If you want to learn a little more about the Civil War, if you're interested in the facts of it, read behind some of Southerners who wrote about it and see what some of the motive was. Obviously, you had ugly motive among the people who were slave owners, but all of those people didn't fight to keep slavery intact. Just going to put that out there. I happen to read a lot of history. I've read a lot of Southern history as well. It's just not the case. So you, me, all of us are going to have to understand one view, one source from one culture of people doesn't always paint the picture of what it is. I just looked up and noticed I'm on 30 minutes here. This has been a long video. I don't want to end on a note like that because I'm not going to minimize the pain of any group of people. And if I have came across like that, I apologize. If it comes across as insensitive, I certainly don't want to be insensitive, and I certainly want to pay attention to how people are affected in this country and by other people. So if I want to leave on a note that matters, something my son said yesterday is trying to be relatable. I'm a debate person. I'm very philosophical, principle based, but on the other hand, I do know what it feels like to be looked at in a certain way, because half of the country is telling people to look at me in a certain way, not based on evidence of anything I've done, but because they just want to keep saying it. That sucks. If I feel that way, it sucks. So some conversations need to be had, but what has happened and what is being pushed right now that scares me for all of us is the left is turning it into acceptable violence and chaos. How are we supposed to have a discussion around that? It's going to lead all people to arm up and want to protect up. That's where that leads. And I want to be a positive impact, starting with my family, in my workplace, in my community, and in my country. And how can I do that? How can I do that if things keep getting said that are not necessarily true? There'll be no connection between groups of people when there's always that little storyline being brought up. This is why I did bring up other facts about history, not to minimize real suffering and pain that people have went through, but to bring up another side of the equation that's often overlooked. That humanity as a whole has a lot of ugly parts. So those of us, that includes white, it includes Southern, Northern, Black, Brown, Native, all people who care about being able to live and let live, certainly are going to have to stop letting mainstream and extremists, whether it be right or left, run everything. We can't function together because the a-holes on both ends are constantly setting the stage and the tone for us. That's not what America's supposed to be. That idea of America, at its root, has to do with liberty. You know, the pursuit of happiness, justice to be here. Man, that comes across in communities. That comes across starting even in families. I hope that the group I belong to can begin to look at what is really happening, and even what Jeff mentioned is we are patriots, and it's not white Southern people who are patriots. There's black patriots, there's Native American patriots, there's Asian patriots. So I am not referring to white patriotism, okay? Get that out of your brain. we have to understand that is under attack right now from extreme leftists. Big time under attack. Chaos is being brought in, and the people who do live here and understand the laws here and are trying to function within the laws that help us all function and be safe around each other to a degree, that's being demolished. And we're just letting them do it. Do I know what step to take? I've said before, we have to start somewhere, and a group like mine that I belong to, we do have people who are trying to learn how to protect themselves with arms, with their hands, trying to learn how to engage civically, running for offices, running for community leadership groups to try to get involved. Us as patriots, and again, as people of principle, and as people who care about how other people feel about things, based within that context of actuality, we all have to step in ways that we can. And I've used the word strength-based many times. Yes, you can do things that are outside of your strength and outside of your capacity. But where you have your strengths, if you put your effort and focus into that, because we all have strengths, we can build and do something with that. So I do suggest strength-based leadership and guides. That has to be part of the equation so something can get done and get done efficiently. If somebody wants to learn other things, that's a whole different ballgame. But strength-based, what is it that you can do? What are you good at doing? This goes for all of us, not just for Watchmen, but for other people in the country who don't necessarily belong to Watchmen, but are patriotic, are Watchmen at heart, that want to be involved. We have to be involved and stop fighting amongst ourselves about position, about influence, about authority, about fame, whatever it is, about our way of doing it's the only way to do it. If we don't move past that and focus on mission and what we value, we won't achieve it, and we will remain patriots without a country. And the things that have been done unjust to people all throughout history, that's the very thing that's happening to us right now. The very thing that's happened all throughout history is happening to people of principle, patriots, Watchmen, your family, your friends, your future generations of people. That's what's happening right now. I hope this dialogue can be opened. And so many people have, well, I don't have time to do this or do that. Look at where we're at because of not having time. You think I have time? People, I'm almost at 40 minutes here on this thing. I said, people's even said to me, well, I have family too. I'm trying to, put time in there. Man, we all have our own struggles. And I'm not trying to put pressure on anybody to do other than what you have a strength in and what has to be done to help us maintain a country of fairness for all people. And I'll say again, all people, and I mean that with the bottom of my heart, all people. If there's injustice happening here or there, it needs to be stopped. But we can't keep functioning over this perceived injustice stuff and labeling where it don't belong. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Have a good one.